Welcome to the echo's chamber. Put down the noise of the world and find the dark corner of your mind. Tonight, the truth isn't read, it is lived. There are lies you tell the cosmos, and then there are the terrible, visceral truths you only whisper to the damp, medieval mud. Tonight, you don't merely witness a forgotten legacy, you live inside the final, shuddering memory of a divine betrayal, the indignity of muscle, the curse of hunger, the awful, quiet resignation that replaced eternal power. This is the truth of the fallen. Find the cold earth now. Close your eyes. The aether is gone, and the fever remains. This is the filthy truth about the first gods who fell to mortal hands. Chapter 1. The ash and the burden. You remember the cold of the aether, don't you? Not a freezing cold, but an absence of friction, a silent liberty where thought was the soul's only territory, that was your domain. Now there is ash. The smell of damp dust mixed with stale oil, clinging to the coarse texture of the wool against your skin, a deep, visceral indignity. That is a ragged tunic. You, who once were the sublime architect, now find yourself draped in layers of mortal filth. Close your eyes, there are no more limitless horizons stretching as far as concept itself. Only humid darkness and a slight, persistent throbbing behind your temple. This is the new, confining reality. The head, that small, fleshy prison where all your anxieties gather and press. Making decisions that once determined the fate of stars now feel impossibly heavy. You sit deeply in a dark corner, simply enduring the fermented odor of the tavern's ale, which causes your stomach. Yes, you possess that flawed organ now to churn with ceaseless nausea. Look at the mortals around you. They move with such agonizing slowness, their conversations revolving around the price of grain and the simple illnesses of their children. They worship you, or at least they worship the simplified idea of you. You are the fallen god, yet in their oblivious eyes, you are merely one more forgotten soul, another shadow. They cannot comprehend that your every breath taken here is an act of eternal parody, and you cannot find release in death. Not because of lost immortality, but because the curse holds your essence cruelly captive between this brittle, decaying flesh and the sublime memory of what you have lost. Chapter 2. The Indignity of Sleep. In the aether, you did not sleep. You experienced the necessary change, simply reformatting existence into a perfect, boundless rest. Now, you are commanded to perform this base ritual, sleep. It arrives without grace, heralded only by the rude weight of mortal eyelids and a drowsiness that brutally crushes your boundless cosmic awareness. You lie upon the wretched straw and await the squalid cessation of consciousness. When sleep finally arrives, it brings no true solace. It is merely endurance through torment. Muscles that once bore the serene weight of galaxies now protest, stiff and aching. Every joint is a complaint, every position a mistake. You are jerked back to awareness multiple times by physical discomforts or the faint scratching of vermin. But the deepest injury is the dreams. You see only broken flashes of your old memory, pure light, the silent dance of planets, the resonant whispers of your divine peers, but it is all tainted, distorted, instantly contaminated by the immediate context of mortal grime, the fear of cold, the echo of weeping faces, the raw, sharp pang of hunger. When you wake, there is no refreshment, only the heavy persistence of fatigue left over from a miserable drama you never asked to join. You have survived the night. This is the welcome, the grim reality of a suffering that demands to be repeated every turn of the sun. Chapter 3. The Price of a Copper Coin. Your power was once the immediate manifestation of reality from pure thought. You sculpted nebulae and held command over the flow of chronological time. Your only currency was the perfect harmony of existence. Now, your very survival is hostage to a single, worn, dented copper coin. This is the true, unending indignity of commerce. You recall the first attempt at bartering. You offered a profound philosophical truther, fragment of knowledge concerning the eternal nature of entropy, in exchange for a small, stale loaf of bread. The baker merely stared at you, his flour-dusted face a testament to impenetrable mortal ignorance. He simply demanded 2 coppers. 2 coppers, representing 2 arduous lifetimes of misery and toil for the average peasant. You were forced to retreat, to craft a small, insignificant wooden doll. A fleeting pastime you invented one bored afternoon millennia ago, and sell it to a passing merchant for that wretched price. You loathed the sensation of the coin, cold, thoroughly filthy, having passed through countless, sweaty, grasping mortal hands. Your once cosmic mind is now utterly confined to calculation. This meager coin can buy bread, but it cannot purchase fuel for the desperate fire. Fuel, in turn, requires more humiliating physical exertion, more scraping through refuse, more performance of a role you despise. The intellect that once easily solved equations governing the expansion of the universe is now painfully reduced to balancing the immediate threat of starvation against the slightly delayed threat of hypothermia. The utter, quiet absurdity of it should destroy your sanity. But madness is just another weakness of the flesh. You simply continue to endure, fueled by a slow, burning, silent resentment that acts as your only constant heat. Chapter 4. The Slow Decay of Worship. Sometimes, the sound carries to you on the wind. They are singing a hymn dedicated to him, the god of the silent mountain, the one credited with ordering the cycle of seasons. It should have been you. You were the true silent mountain, the one who commanded the turning. Now, you watch your ancient temple from the miserable cover of a rotting apple cart. The foundational stone still holds a haunting beauty. The architecture remains tragically perfect. They even retain your ancient symbol, the twisting serpent biting its own tail, carved onto the main lintel. But the serpent's tail is cracked now, and the hymns are terribly wrong. They have brutally twisted your core tenets, focusing only on petty fertility and crops when your domain was and remains the flawless, terrifying logic of the void. The priest leading the ceremony is a man whose voice cracks when he attempts to reach the proper high note. He preaches a gentle lie about your former glory, and that comforting lie is infinitely preferred by the mortals over the horrifying truth you actually represented. You feel a quiet, profound grief, not just because they fail to understand you, but because the misunderstanding is so pathetically trivial. It possesses no passion, no depth, merely cheap, predictable reassurance. You realize they never craved the awful reverence of a true God. They only desired the convenient predictability of an automated promise. And here you are, the true deity, standing among the literal refuse, forced to observe your own sublime legacy being contaminated by mortal comfort. You are too weak to bring down the divine hammer upon the priest, yet too eternally bound to simply walk away and let the memory finally perish. So you remain, listening to the broken hymn, the testament to your perfect and complete failure. Chapter 5. The Clumsiness of Flesh. You find yourself doing something utterly confusing. The stumble. This pathetic body, This biological machine, composed of brittle bone and weary sinew, possesses a terrifying lack of coordination and grace. You, whose cosmic form navigated the tightest gravitational bends without a ripple, now catch your toe on a misplaced cobblestone. You manage to arrest your fall, but your heart, a small, ridiculous, and highly inefficient pump hammers a furious rhythm in your fragile chest. The mortals nearby barely notice. Such clumsy accidents are simply mundane facts of their existence. The flesh demands constant, demanding, and irritating maintenance. It requires water, which must be fetched from a muddy creek and laboriously boiled over a smoky, sputtering fire, always introducing the low risk of contamination and internal distress. It becomes overwhelmingly cold, a profound weakness that actively siphons energy away from the subtle necessities of thought, and it sustains injuries. A small, simple cut on your hand, acquired while merely attempting to harvest wild berries, demands concentration just to staunch the flow of that sticky, pathetic red fluid. You are struck by the sheer, terrifying fragility of your temporary container. You remember designing galaxies with a single, serene gesture, effortlessly balancing the tension between dark matter and light. Now, you struggle with the simple act of holding a crude wooden spoon, your mortal hand trembling faintly from the combination of overwhelming fatigue and constant poor nutrition. The paradox is exhausting. The universe inside your consciousness is still infinite, yet the cage that contains it can be defeated by a minor fever or a sharp sliver of wood. You try to summon your former magic, a simple manipulation of the ambient air, but the best you can achieve is a slight, pathetic shudder in the nearest clump of dry leaves, a whisper quiet, devastating failure. The power still resides deep within, but it demands fuel this pathetic body can no longer provide. You are a starship powered by the feeblest, most flickering of candles. Chapter 6. The Horror of Shared Mortality. You are forced to witness the brief conclusion of mortal life, frequently. It is quick here, and surprisingly undramatic. A persistent cough that eventually deepens, a slip on slick ice, a sudden, merciless fever that cools the body into stillness forever. In the grand, indifferent tapestry of the cosmos, death was merely a necessary phase change, a return of energy to the absolute source, a beautiful and inevitable collapse. But here, observed through these mortal eyes, it is a filthy, heartbreaking end. Yesterday, you observed a young woman. Her hair was dark and woven into neat braids. She sold meager vegetables, and she possessed a laughter, sharp, clear, and beautifully innocent sound. Today, she is vanished. Her laughter was abruptly cut short, mid-sentence, midday, interrupted by the final, clumsy failure of her vital functions. You stood nearby, concealed by the shade of a ragged awning, watching her husband cradle her quickly cooling face. He wept, his grief a raw, terrible noise that tore at the threads of your residual divine empathy. Before the fall, you understood grief merely as the predictable, necessary shadow to the concept of joy. Now, you understand it as a painful, biological error, a pointless, agonizing subroutine that begins running the moment the primary physical code is ruthlessly terminated. And the true horror is this: you now share their fate. Not today, perhaps not this year, but the curse guarantees that one day you too will experience that undignified, clumsy, final failure of the flesh. You, who once set the perfect order of the stars, will be reduced to a lump of cooling meat, and the memory of your vastness will dissolve with the last, pointless intake of mortal air. You turn and walk away from the crying man, not out of malice, but out of a profound, nauseating terror that is now directed at yourself. Chapter 7. The taste of sour wine. The mortals refer to this fleeting feeling as pleasure, intoxication. Before your fall, your deepest ecstasy was the convergence of cosmic energizer, moment of sublime, absolute understanding. Now, you sit quietly with a heavy, crude tankard of cheap, sour wine. It tastes foul, aggressively acidicate. It provides the nearest sensation to peace you have been able to find. It introduces a delightful, temporary sloppiness to the mortal mind, successfully dulling the sharp edges of your infinite, painful memories. The wine possesses no power to restore your divinity, but it succeeds in suppressing the torturous knowledge of your loss. For a brief, blessed hour, you successfully forget the magnificent constellations you once guided, and worry only about the immediate warmth of the tavern's single fire. You listen to the slurred, petty, and insignificant arguments of the farmers at the next table, and for the first time in this cursed existence, you find yourself almost quietly amused, not with cosmic, condescending judgment, but with the quiet, resigned cynicism of a mortal who has witnessed too much and has learned to stop caring. This is the ultimate humiliation. You now actively crave this predictable chemical dulling. You, who once possessed the most immaculate intellect in existence, are now forced to rely upon fermented fruit juice to achieve temporary escape from the crushing weight of your own impossible glory. But the reprieve is always short. The crushing headache inevitably returns, worse than before, and the world snaps back into its unforgiving, grimy, and tedious focus. You realize that your reliance on this common vice is merely one more subtle layer of the curse. You did not just fall to this wretched earth. You fell into predictable dependence, into low, agonizing, and mortal appetites. Chapter 8. The slow shift of empathy. You swore a solemn oath that you would never truly care for them. They are temporary, pathetically ignorant, and irritatingly prone to irrational optimism. But they simply persist. You observe a small, grubby boy quietly offering half of his meager dry piece of bread to a stray dog whose ribs are clearly visible. You see an old woman, crippled and clearly poor, attempting the arduous task of repairing a hole in the thatched roof of her equally impoverished neighbor. These small actions are entirely irrational, utterly pointless, and deeply costly in the face of the universe's grinding, inevitable entropy. And yet, they possess a quiet, fierce beauty. This realization is far more painful than the sharpest pangs of mortal hunger. You begin to grasp that the very same fragility you despise the brevity of their time, the cheapness of their existences, the actual source of their strange, sputtering light. They choose to perform these acts of kindness not because they are immortal and know the final, serene script, but precisely because they are fleeting and must choose light in this profound darkness. A small, reluctant respect begins to flower in your cold, hollow heart. It is not pity, it is a profound, terrifying form of kinship. You were once flawless, perfectly ordered, and ultimately sterile. Now you are deeply flawed, you are suffering, and you are unexpectedly capable of feeling the consuming, agonizing warmth of genuine empathy, warmth that burns with the full, devastating knowledge of its inevitable extinction. You realize the ultimate, painful truth. The fall did not merely strip you of your power, it cruelly gifted you a capacity for true feeling that your divine self never once comprehended, and you despise the fragility that makes it possible. Chapter 9. The Tired Truth. You look up at the vast night sky now. It remains utterly familiar to your cosmic memory. yet it is completely alien to your current flesh. You can effortlessly trace the orbital path of every minor comet. You know the precise gravity equations for every distant gas giant. But you cannot feel the silent presence of the stars anymore. You only register the rough, cold stone beneath your feet and the dull, persistent gnawing of hunger. The cosmos remains vast and entirely indifferent, and you are irrevocably trapped upon a single, insignificant mud ball, patiently waiting for the inevitable day your borrowed heart finally stops its clumsy, mortal rhythm. The final irony is complete. You, the sublime architect of eternal truth, are now living the most painful, honest truth of all: absolute insignificance. You have become the very thing you once dismissed as, struggling, aching, momentary creature of mere dust. And in the long, silent hours of the night, you no longer rage against the mortals who successfully brought you low. You rage instead at the crushing injustice of their temporary, exquisitely fleeting beauty. The end. The silent world moves on without your command. The distant constellations perpetually wheel above, utterly unaware of the great, fallen power kneeling beneath the damp moss. The curse is now complete. It is not merely the imposition of suffering, but the final, quiet acceptance of the pain. You are no longer divine. You are merely enduring. And endurance, as you now profoundly understand, is the most miserable, most necessary, and most agonizing mortal magic of all. Sleep now, before the cold sun rises and the absurdity begins once more.